Good morning, metalheads of the internet, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Metal Meltdown. Today we are talking about Modern Primitive, the 11th studio album from Greek symphonic death metal band Septicflesh. Septicflesh have been kicking around for about 30 years by now and have played around with everything from death doom to blackened death metal to gothic metal to industrial metal through records like Sumerian Demons, Revolution DNA, and many more. But with all due respect, if you are familiar with Septicflesh, it is not because of those sounds and those records and that era of Septicflesh. If you're familiar with Septicflesh, it is entirely because of 2008's Communion. Undoubtedly the band's breakthrough record. It also introduced us to the symphonic death metal side of Septicflesh, a side that they have continued to show quite confidently over the course of the last 14 years. Through records like The Great Mass, Titan, Codex Omega, all of which have been well received by fans and critics alike. The Great Mass in particular was named one of the greatest symphonic metal albums of all time by Metal Hammer in 2021. I have to admit, there's a part of me that personally prefers some of the older material. I think I would actually argue that Sumerian Demons in particular is their best record, but there's a lot of stuff on Communion and The Great Mass that I really like, and while I don't immediately remember much of Codex Omega, I remember mostly liking it at the time of its initial release. As far as Modern Primitive is concerned, though, I think we are officially reaching a point where maybe it's time for Septicflesh to branch out a little bit more, because this record, by the standards of Septicflesh, feels somewhat one-dimensional. There's really nothing on this record that we haven't heard done on a previous Septicflesh record, and quite frankly, just done better on a previous Septicflesh record. There's a real lack of memorable and dynamic melodies. The riffs don't really have much of an impact. The sound mix overall is way, way too fucking clean. I mean, Jesus Christ, I understand it's symphonic metal, but can we get a little bit of dirt kicked up, please? Is it too much to ask for a little bit of mud, a little bit of blood on these guitars? I do think that there is still some good material on this record, and I gotta say, I love Septicflesh's commitment to emphasizing the symphonic in symphonic metal as opposed to the other way around with every other fucking symphonic metal band. Like, these guys are still recording with a full-blown orchestra, and they're whipping up some pretty cool arrangements for that full-blown orchestra. That's great. I respect the fuck out of that. But overall, I still find myself being somewhat disinterested in Modern Primitive, and coming from a band who have consistently written so much bombastic and invigorating cinematic material, I think that's genuinely really disappointing. I think the album starts off on a pretty decent note with the Collector. I like a lot of the traditional Greek instruments, the guitars and some of the melodies they're playing around with. The main riff is one of the stronger on the entire record. It's big, it's chunky. The track in general exudes and evokes a real sense of danger and urgency. Like, there's a real emphasis on making this really creepy and really simultaneously abrasive with all these different vocal textures and some slower, menacing riffs and drum patterns. Contrasted, of course, with the neoclassical elements, with the orchestral elements, it makes for something, appropriately horrifying. Not overwhelmingly horrifying in the vein of, say, the most recent Blood Us Nord record. But it's spooky. If you're brand new to Septicflesh, I could picture you being like, "Whoa, what is this?" right off the bat. Self-Eater and Neuromancer are pretty strong as well. Very dark, very brooding. I like the way the strings swoon and swell in contrast with the very powerful, oppressive Greek death metal. It makes for a really cinematic display. I think the best track on the record would probably be Coming Storm, because it does a great job at sonically painting a picture of an actual fucking storm. Like, there are flurries of manic guitar and battering rhythms and really over the top and harrowing string arrangements. For a moment, it almost has the same kind of tension and charge of like the original score from the Jaws film way back in the 70s. And just like the Jaws theme, there's a lot of tension being constantly built up. The track gradually gets faster, it gets more intense, it gets more brutal and more chaotic up until sparse moments where you've reached what I guess could be considered the eye of the storm, where there are lone female choirs and softer vocal textures and guitar patterns to kind of, give you a moment of fresh air. You're in the eye of the storm. You're safe for the moment. Unfortunately, though, the rest of the album just feels somewhat lackluster. Again, there's a real lack of memorable, dynamic riffs and choruses and melodies. The clean vocals across this record in particular aren't really doing a lot for me. I've never really been a huge fan of Septicflesh's clean vocals to begin with, but on this record in particular, I don't know, it's sounding a little bit too Diet Serge Tankian for my personal liking. The production, for some reason, is also really fucking flat, and that definitely kills a lot of the potential. Like, the guitars just feel kind of lifeless. Like, they're very clean, they're very compressed, and they don't really have any muscle or meat to them whatsoever. Where's the grit? Where's the def, goddammit? It's death metal, where's the def? Even the orchestral arrangements feel somewhat synthetic. It's not as rich or as full as I would expect a full-blown fucking orchestra to sound. Like, honestly, with the exception of a few horn sections here and there, I was pretty convinced that a lot of this was done on keyboards and synthesizers, up until I started doing some more in-depth research on this record and what went into making it. This is also Septicflesh's shortest album since Communion. And while it might be a bit of a coincidence, I can't help but feel as if this somehow validates the feeling that this record was just kind of crapped out in a relatively short amount of time. I'm just not seeing the level of effort and ambition and heart here that I did see on Communion, on The Great Mass, and on earlier records like the aforementioned Sumerian Demons. I think overall I'd give this like a 2.5 out of 5. It's okay. There's a couple decent songs which we've highlighted, but for the most part, it's just really forgettable and totally unremarkable. To the point where I'm honestly a little shocked that people are liking this as much as they are. I mean, I'm not, y'all listen to whatever the fuck you want, y'all enjoy whatever the fuck you want, your prerogative. But when I put up that YouTube community post where I was like, oh, the next album we're going to talk about is so scary and so exciting, and a lot of y'all were like, oh, is it Septicflesh? I kind of just went, what? No. As I said before, Modern Primitive is Septicflesh doing what they do and not really doing it as well here as they've done it on prior studio albums. If you just love Septicflesh, namely the symphonic death metal side of Septicflesh, then I suppose you will probably love this record. But I don't know, if nothing I've talked about excites you or interests you, I would say maybe don't bother in this particular instance. Okay, well, maybe listen to Coming Storm, because that's actually a really good fucking song, but the rest of it, yeah, it's not doing a lot for me. I'll probably forget about this album shortly after this video is online, and that'll pretty much be that. So, yeah, 2.5 out of 5. It's okay. It's fine. It's totally 100% fine. That's it. I'm gonna go make myself some breakfast now. Hopefully I'll be eating something a little bit more fulfilling and substantial and nutritious than Modern Primitive. Hashtag sorry not sorry. And that is it for the Metal Meltdown. I'm not an expert, nor do I claim to be, so what do you think? Do you like this record? Do you not like this record? And what do you want to hear from me next? And thank you for watching. Make sure you press subscribe right here so you get updates on the Metal Meltdown fucking immediately. And as always, you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.